Good evening, everyone. Welcome, especially on this horrible evening. A warm welcome to you all. Can I warmly welcome the Right Honourable Hugo Swire MP, our MP, who's kindly come along this evening to answer some questions from you. But before we start, can I remind you of a few domestics, please? First of all, means of escape, Swire the means that you came in, and obviously to your left and right for our other doors. Can I ask you if you've got any mobile phones? Please turn them off. Now, before we start, Garen from the campaign group would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Mike. First of all, thank you to our MP, Hugo Swire, for responding to the request to come and see us here in St Mary this evening. Thank you also to Mike Norman and Rob Patton for chairing the meeting. Most importantly, thank you to all of you that have come to support us this evening and have supported us throughout the last few months with the campaign letters and all the backup that we've had. Thank you. For anybody that hasn't met me before, I'm Garen Haley. We set up the Save St Mary campaign. Please can I remind everyone this evening the purpose of the meeting is to discuss the planning issues here at St Mary. We have got a certain amount of limited time, so please stick to the topic. Should there be any spare time at the end, obviously we can broaden the horizon if anybody's got any other topics from other areas that we wish to discuss. Thank you.
Right, so who would like to start the ball rolling with a question?
Even better, I'll start the ball rolling with a few words. Thanks for turning out on this rather wet and windy evening. If you think you've got problems, I've just come from Sidmouth, and where, since I've been the MP now, which is since 2001, we've been looking at ways to stop the erosion of Pennington Point and Alma Bridge. And those poor people living at Coast Guard Road at the top, I don't know how many of you know Sidmouth, but watch their gardens disappear year on year because of the appalling weather. The reason I say this is because, of course, this does have an effect on the rest of development in this wonderful part of the world, in so much as we do have problems with flooding, we do have problems with wet parts of the country, wet plains and so forth. We've got to be careful where we do plan. I had a very interesting meeting. You were there like last couple of weeks ago at Epford and Cliff St George. Similar meeting to this to talk about issues of concern to them. And I've got another one tomorrow night actually at Woodbury to talk again about. They want to see me as well. And I'd like to thank each and every one of you who writes to me with your concerns, particularly about planning, which is what we're talking about here tonight. I want to thank you, and I want to assure you that I pass on your comments to the ministers or to the District Council, the Planning Authority. But I have to say to you, although there will be those of you in this hall who would have it otherwise, I have to stress that the limits of my power to do anything about individual planning applications as your Member of Parliament. And I think there has been some confusion here, deliberate or otherwise, about the role of a Member of Parliament. It is not the role of a Member of Parliament to adjudicate not only on individual planning matters or planning applications, but also on bigger issues. That's why what we do is often behind the scenes. That's why if you look at all the statements and articles that I've written over the past decade plus, I've been entirely consistent in what I've said, particularly about this part of the constituency, where I have said repeatedly that I do not want there to be an urban sprawl stretching all the way down, really from here, this side of the estuary to Exeter, as a sort of gloriously extended part of Exeter. I want the communities to retain their individuality. Now, that having been said, there is huge pressure to build more houses across the UK. For the first time, I think, ever, the age at which first-time home buyers are able to afford buying a new home is something like 30 years old. We are building fewer houses here in the United Kingdom any time since the 1930s. So we do have to build more houses. And East Devon has to play its part in absorbing some of those houses. But it seems to me the key is, where do those houses go? Where do they go where they can enhance a local community, not detract from a local community? And critically, what should those houses look like? Because I've always said, if houses are well planned and they fit the local vernacular, people are going to be far less against having them than they are if they're just yet another anonymous housing development plonked on the edge of their existing settlement. I want to add also the importance of our local infrastructure. Now, it won't escape many of you that there is only one way really to the sea from here, and that is down what I call the chicane-ridden road that goes from here to Exmouth, which we all know and have to navigate from time to time. When Cranbrook reaches its full capacity, where do you think all those people are going to go on a sunny day? That's the road they're going to use as well. When these developments happen, if they do, in any great number, what are the pressures going to be on our existing services, on our medical facilities, on our schools? Exmouth already has the largest secondary school in the country. We always, for 15 years, they've been talking about building another secondary school elsewhere, but no one's come up with the money or the location. So the pressures on this part of the world are huge. The reason that people want to live in this part of the world is because it has a beautiful landscape and a beautiful seascape. The reason that many of you came to live here is because of that. And that having been said, we need to be aware that there are many people who have come to live here who weren't born here, who could, it would be argued, have contributed to a problem because that's denied local people affordable houses to live in themselves. So we can't just pull up the drawbridge and say, we're here, no one else can come. That's not possible either. So what we want is sustainable development, which fits in with the existing communities, which is properly planned. And yes, we'll take the pain, if that's what it is, of absorbing more houses. But we want local communities to have a say. And this, I will just finish on this point. One of the things I have been doing as your MP, consistently, is urging, that Mike will bear this out, the District Council to come up with a local plan. To date, and I think you may have some news on this, they haven't come up with a local plan. Not only a local plan I'm concerned about, it's also these local neighbourhood plans where communities can come up with a design statement of what they want their community to look like. Some have done one, Lindstone's done one, others haven't. And I urge all local communities to come up with their own local neighbourhood plan. But the main thing is the local plan is critically important. But I just want to shoot down one urban myth which has been allowed to grow up. And that is, in the absence of a local plan, there is an open charter for developers. I don't think that's true, and I talked to the Housing Minister again about it, Brandon Lewis, last week. And the evidence of that is, although there are planning applications stacked up over this part of the constituency, like aeroplanes over Heathrow coming into land, one was turned down last week, 93 homes by the Cat and Fiddle Inn. That was a planning application which was rejected, I think as recently as about a week or so ago. So if it was an open charter for development, that shows that that is not actually the case. But we do need a local plan. We do need to show the planning inspector where the land is available going forward for, I think, 15 years plus. And we can do that. We can absorb that if we do it properly. The idea of having a local plan was for the first time to devolve planning decisions to local communities who could get more involved in where those communities could go. Before, we had the Westminster Whitehall Predict plans, the regional spatial strategy, with Whitehall knowing best, saying where these houses should go, how many there should be. Now there is a genuine attempt from the grassroots to engage the local community through your district councillors to actually decide where this planning should be. We can't ignore the figures we're given. We can contest them and argue they're too many. If they are, we don't know what they are yet. But in terms of what's going to be built and where the local community must have a say, and I will support you as I continue to support you, as I've done over the past decade plus, in having more say. But don't please think that I, at the stroke of a pen, can decide where these housing developments go. I can't. That is not what I'm elected to do. It is not what I am mandated to do. And any MP, being honest, would tell you the same. I will champion you. I will always do that. But you must be aware of my limitations. Thank you.
On that note, is there a question coming forward? Yes.
You kindly told us what you can't do at some length, which is fine. Can you tell us, please, if locally these plans are rejected, which we hope they will be, like the Catfiddle one, they will then likely go to appeal. What can you do to help us when they go to appeal?
Well, the answer is, if they do it in the proper way, there's very little I, as your MP, can do. I can always raise it with the Secretary of State, but the Secretary of State will bounce it back to me saying it's up to the planning inspector in Bristol. That's the fact. What I am doing, incidentally, is I'm getting a meeting with, I've got a meeting scheduled with Brandon Lewis, the Housing Minister, and I'm inviting up planning officers from both East Devon and Exeter, because of course the East Devon constituency now includes 2 wards of Exeter, St Loyd's and Topsom, and to actually run through what can be done in the absence of a local plan.
The Save to St Mary group has got some questions that we'd like to ask. So firstly, what's the government current policy regarding the inappropriate development of local villages, and to what extent do you envisage that this will change, if at all, in the forthcoming manifesto?
Well, I think I'll just repeat again, there is a national shortage of housing, and you have to be 30 now to get on the housing. I said we need to build more housing. What we don't need to do is to concrete over one of the most beautiful parts of England. I got very involved in the early days of Cranbrook, when we were faced with having Cranbrook. I set up as a design group. I got people from all over the county to try and get a community of which we could be proud. And I was soon seen off in that respect until basically it was none of my business. But at the time, the constituency stretched all the way to the Somerset border. It went up to Chardstock, Axminster. That was the East Devon constituency. In fact, that was my constituency until the last general election when the boundaries changed. And at the time, I remember Axminster being desperate for, they were actually asking for development in Axminster to fill in the bypass at Axminster. And so you had this extraordinary situation where in those days, not so long ago, Axminster were told, oh no, you can't have this extra housing, which you want, because all the extra housing is going to be in Cranbrook. And now Cranbrook seems to be getting bigger by the day, and we're told not only have we got Cranbrook, but we've got to have extra housing elsewhere as well. Now there are some communities who actively want more housing. They want more housing because they want more children to be there to go to prop up the village school or the village shop or the whatever community it is. But there are other communities who already feel desperately under threat, and those are the ones I am concerned about. But actually, that's why it's so important that the neighbourhood plans are adopted by neighbourhoods, spelling out clearly what sort of housing people want and where they want it in their communities, and working closely with the district councillors, who ultimately is the planning authority is East Devon District Council. That's Mike, you want to say something?
I don't think I can really answer that. If that is the case, that is what we try and do. And we have the neighbourhood plan started here as well. Rob, obviously, heading that for us. I'll come back to the local plan in a second, because 10 days ago, we had a letter from the planning inspectorate on our local plan after we at East Devon wrote to him asking how we can move this on. We are still waiting for some numbers, and there's a bit of an argument going on about that at the minute. But the planning inspector in his letter, which is on the public website, does state if we get to him the amendments we hope to make by mid-April, then he will be happy to help us draft questions and guide representations so that we can speed this up as best we can. Now, it's not a be-all and end-all, and to get to April, mid-April, to submit something to him, it's still got to go through planning committee, Overview and Standards Committee and full council at East End, which I think is a tough order, but nevertheless, I'm certainly asking for extraordinary meetings of all those committees to make sure it does do that. But, as we said, we've refused one, we haven't got time, we will keep pushing it, and we'll do everything we can.
Second question.
Is someone there? Yes, Chris.
Well, one thing that seems to be a paradox here, we've got, as we know, 3 major planning applications in this parish, plus 1 or 2 that have been accepted, and a similar situation all around, and yet still each planning application is taken in isolation without reference to anything else that's going around. And I fancy, and I submit to you, this is why we're getting an over-urbanisation of this region, because they're not looking at the whole picture.
Well, it's my understanding that the local plan is designed to do exactly that, working in conjunction with the neighbourhood plans, which is why it's so important that neighbourhood plans are adopted, because once the local plan is adopted, the planners have to pay attention to what's also in the neighbourhood plan, is my understanding.
Yeah, that is the fundamental, and you're dead right, Chris. We are present in planning without a local plan, can only view each individual application when it arrives on the desk in the order it arrives on the desk. So we cannot look at 3 or 4 or anything else. It's a real nightmare as far as I'm concerned, and the planners as well.
Even though collectively it's having an impact on the neighbourhood.
Exactly that, and when you take the roads, I mean,
Exactly, that's what...
we're at capacity here, and highways can't object, because none of the individual applications has a severe impact, according to the legislation at government level. So they all go through, but combined, they're 5 times severe. So something to sort that would be nice.
Could I just ask you a question, almost on the same basis? First of all, is it true when solar fields are no longer required as solar fields, they're brownfield? If that's the case, we can anticipate development there. And if that's the case, who takes account of that at the moment?
I don't know the answer to that. I would have thought that anyone being given planning permission for a solar field has been given planning to have a solar field. I have no idea the status of that field once it ceases to be a solar field. I think these solar fields are all predicated or calculated on contracts lasting as much as 15, 20 years plus. So I have no idea. I can find out, and I'm not sure there's anything in legislation about it. Perhaps, again, it's a planning matter.
They are given a 25-year temporary permission.
Until the subsidy.
Well, the issue you've got, I suppose, is they only started in the last 10, 15 years. No one's ever got to the 25-year stage to see what happens afterwards. But,
I think we've got other dragons more immediately to slay.
I think you're right, Andy. There is a suggestion that the sites could become brownfields
They've been used for commercial purposes.
before the 25 years are up. It's not a viable proposition.
Okay, on solar farms, what's the current government policy on solar farms?
Well, we are encouraging alternative energy. We've put a moratorium on the expansion of wind farms. We're not building any more of those. There are enough permissions for that, which I think is the right thing. In this part of the world, we need to harness far more wave power and hub power, which is being developed down in Plymouth and elsewhere. But solar farms, again, is I think we need to see a lot more solar panels on commercial buildings. And that technology is advancing by the day. And indeed, I think we're getting to the point now where we're seeing some interesting developments in domestic solar panels, which fit in far more with existing roof spaces rather than just look rather unsightly plonked on top. And I think that will have a major effect. And solar farms in the right place, I have no objection to. Is when I would regard solar farms as being inappropriately placed, and I think a good place for a solar farm, for instance, is along motorways, and anyone driving up and down the M5 will see these huge fields of solar farms. I think if you've got a motorway and a solar farm next door to it, that's fine, but I think a solar farm on what is formerly good agricultural land, to my way of thinking, is not so good.
Okay, Shouldn't the current planning adoption be put on hold until our local neighbourhood plan is adopted?
Well, I was asked that the other day, and Mike, you might want to comment on that, but I think that there's no way of actually doing that. I think planning permissions will still continue to be denied and to be granted, as is evidenced by the refusal of this planning application in the Cat and Fiddle. But you know, we haven't had a local plan, we haven't got a local plan, but we haven't had a local plan to date, and other developments which we were told were going to happen, which I raised publicly, but you know, within the limits, as I say, what I can do, for instance at Cortlands, where there was going to be a huge development which effectively would have compromised the separation between Exmouth and Lympstone. That didn't happen. So permissions come and go, and I think we want to separate what happens from some of the headlines that we sometimes read about. And there's no way you could just put a moratorium on any form of planning until a local plan is adopted. But I think what we do need to make sure is that the senior planning officers, both at East Devon and in Exeter, are aware of what can and cannot be done when there is not a local plan in terms of refusing permission where that permission doesn't fit in with the national policy framework, and that's why I fixed up this meeting with the Housing Minister, Brandon Lewis, and officials from down here to make sure that they are absolutely aware of what can and cannot be done working without a local plan.
How are the projected housing requirements and expectations determined?
It is done on demographics, on anticipated demographics. The figure that's been bandied around, and I genuinely don't know if there's any, if the regional inspector is anywhere, planning inspector is on the same wavelength. But the sort of figures I think we've been talking or hearing is what, 15?
Yeah, somewhere between 15 and 18, I believe.
15 over a period of 25 years. It's quite. I mean, this is not an immediate sort of. Something 15,000 houses on something in the period. This is over a 25-year period. Whether that figure is variable or will be revisited in that 25 years, I hope I'm around to argue that it should be. But it's a long period. It's trying really for the first time to have a strategic view, influenced by a decision-making process, right down to the grassroots, where you can hold your local councillors to account for what they, not what they say publicly, but actually what they can actually achieve. It seems to me to be a rather different thing. In terms of delivering for the local communities, what is, given the fact that you can't just say no, we're not having these houses, we're not accepting that amount of houses, because if we say that, then it just goes back to the inspector who just throws it back again at us. Then we go on operating in this never land and not having a locally adopted plan. So I think we're right to try and get this local plan as quickly as possible. My way of thinking, it's overdue. And once we've got the local plan, make sure that our neighbourhood plans are up to scratch, and then I think we are in a much better position over the next for the next 25 years.
Yes.
There was a meeting recently where lots of planning authorities were talking about the expansion of Exeter, and I heard a figure of 50,000 new houses, or not houses, but 50,000 new people, or housing being provided for 50,000 people on the outskirts of Exeter into East Devon. Is that something you're aware of?
Well, because Exeter is a separate authority to
Well, they were
East
talking
Devon.
about the Exeter growth point, which I think is junction.
Well, the Exeter growth point is really surrounds the science park, and just before Cranbrook, the science park and all around there. That's the growth point as designated in the area. But certainly, you've got the urban development, which of course is Cranbrook, which I would expect to grow significantly. But the rest of the growth point as such is the business park and the science park. And I certainly haven't heard a figure of 50,000 houses being mentioned anyway.
No.
Whether there is a need identified in the city for 50,000 houses, that seems a...
I think it was housing for 50,000 people rather than 50,000 houses, if that makes sense.
Right.
And it also included the area around the, what's the hotel called in Marsh Barton, White something, that area, because that's the...
Oh, the Devon Hotel.
Yeah.
Right, well that's Marsh Barton. I think that would be a strange place to develop. I don't know where unless you were developing Marsh Barton itself. It doesn't seem to me there's much appropriate land around that hotel. But that, I mean, the fact of the matter is, I don't know, to be honest, I haven't heard these figures at all, certainly not in terms of East Devon or the growth rate. And what I would say is that Exeter is, really humming as a city. And it's attracting a lot of younger people. The university is growing great guns, one of the best universities in the country now, international reputation in terms of research. I'm very pleased that I was able to help persuade my ministerial colleagues to get the new computer for the Met Office, which is going to be hugely important. I think the Science Park is going to attract some leading cutting-edge companies, which I very much welcome, because the one thing we've suffered from here for a very long time is low-paid, seasonally dependent jobs. And what the Science Park will do is provide cleaner, more highly paid jobs, which is what we desperately need. I think Cranbrook will grow, and I would personally like to see Cranbrook absorbing more of the housing needs of East Devon going forward. I think it's a logical place now we've started to extend. But we can't deny the fact that an awful lot of people want to come and live in the southwest, and who can blame them?
Lady, yes. Yes.
Hi,
Claire.
yes. I'm Claire Rice, I'm a councillor in a neighbouring ward, and I've been dealing with planning applications for years, and apologies for being late, so I may have missed something. But it seems that the one thing that's sort of the elephant in the room that we haven't spoken about yet is the National Planning Policy Framework. And before the National Planning Policy Framework came in, there was a much stronger protection for the countryside and for areas outside built-up area boundaries. And I note that there's a message about holding our councillors to account for the local plan. And of course, East Devon District Council must get an up-to-date local plan. Hopefully that will happen fairly soon. However, we also need to, if we're going to protect the countryside, protect villages from growing out of control, we need to amend the National Planning Policy Framework. And I wondered whether Hugo Swire could reassure us that he had plans to put...
Well, we've got the point. Thank you. Thank you for that. I think you did miss the first bit when Mike gave an update on where we are with the local plan. Look, the point is, had you been here at the beginning, you'd have heard me say we need to recognise the fact that there are fewer houses being built in this country than at any time since the 1930s. And it's now, you have to get to the age of about 30 to get on the housing ladder. So it is a balance, particularly in this part of the world where we have limited land because we have the sea on one side, and the estuary on another, and already there are parts of it which are getting, to my way of thinking, very developed. So there is a balance. But in terms of the overall national planning policy framework, the idea that the local plan is the first genuine attempt to actually give the decision-making powers where they should be with local authorities, with locally elected councillors, and, frankly, I would say to any local councillor, it's up to you to represent your constituents and to work hard to make sure that actually planning fits in with their aspirations and within the local plan when it comes, and within the neighbourhood plans which have to be taken into account by the local plan.
Can I just come back to that? Would you mind?
Yes.
Just briefly. I'm sorry, that's just not right. The local plan has to be in conformity with the National Planning Policy Framework. The National Planning Policy Framework is a document that is all about economic growth. So all of the controls and all of the protections that were in place prior to the NPPF have been trumped in favour of economic growth. So I'm sorry, and even you'll find now local plans that have been developed right across the country are not enough to actually see off developments, even completed adopted ones. So it's still not enough because of the NPPF and its presumption in favour.
I think that actually, if you look at what's actually happened here, we're talking about development in St Mary tonight. You'll see that actually a planning permission for 93 homes by the Cat and Fiddle has been rejected. So if there's a total presumption in favour of development, there are still large-scale planning applications which are being refused.
Yes, sir.
It was said a few weeks ago that the supermarkets were holding on to lots of brownfield land sites, and now say that they're not going to build on them because in fact they're going to shut supermarkets down. Well, surely these sites, if they're good enough for the supermarket, where there's loads and loads of traffic to and fro all day, they'll be ideal for housing developments. So why isn't the government making the supermarkets let go of this land to build houses on?
I don't think it's just the supermarkets. I think a lot of developers have over the years built up huge land banks, and supermarkets are amongst them. And certainly those are in sites which, to my way of thinking, could easily be developed and absorb a lot of the planning applications.
I think that's the problem. I think that's what we're experiencing instead. We're granting permissions where necessary and present. We're not seeing the building rates keep up with the granting permissions we're doing. So the housing is still falling backwards. And we do need developers to build. And we could almost then ease up on the planning applications.
Yes, Kavana Homes is a typical example of that behind us. They're not due to start at earliest 2016. So there's an example.
So what pressure can be brought upon these developers to come into start with that earlier stage?
Your question was what pressure can be brought on people with land banks?
Yes.
Well, I mean, the pressure you bring on them is, I suppose, you could have time-lapsed applications, planning permissions, you could have taxation, which you already have on empty properties and so forth, you could do a number of different issues. But, you know, I do think we need to be, I do think we all agree, actually, we do need to see where the homes are coming, when we know what the numbers are, and it's only really, I think, once we get the local plan in, that we can actually see the wood from the trees and begin to sort out where things should go. That will be up to the local planning authority, East Devon.
Kieran.
Why has it been necessary for our parish council and indeed the local residents to have to pay for professional planning consultants?
In respect of it. Well,
I mean, being as this was actually suggested by me in the first place, it gives us the best chance. I think it's the only answer we can give. I have faith in the planning officers. I believe they do a well-balanced assessment. I'm not saying they're right all the time. I disagree with them a lot. But it by far ups our chances, and that's why I think I propose that the parish council, etc., the resident association, why we've gone this route. I think it's the best chance of succeeding where we need to.
in terms of I'm pleased that you've got a neighbourhood plan underway. And I wondered if you knew there is funding, I think, as far as I'm aware, available for a neighbourhood plan.
Well, we've had funding for the neighbourhood plan. There was a first tranche of funding which was issued sometime middle of last year. We received £7,000. It had to be spent by the end of December, and we understand that there is a second tranche due to come out March time, which the government are issuing. I don't know whether you have any information on that, but obviously we're keen to get our hands on our share of it.
If you send me your budget, I'll see what I can do with the housing minister.
Karen?
Yes. Councillor Kathy Rogers, I'm Chair of Planning for Livingston Parish Council. We sympathise greatly with St Mary because you're at the end of a big, long row of housing that's going to come from Exmouth. When we get our Dinham Way link, all that traffic is going to congest all the way down. You've got Exton, Woodbury, all getting built on, all being directed onto one road. And all I can see is in the summer, when we have Haven open up the doors for all their holiday makers trying to get into Exmouth, I don't think we're just going to have complete gridlock. One bus breakdown and we've got the whole road blocked.
Well, all indeed flooding, which we've seen as well on that road. Look, I've made this point repeatedly. I mean, in fact, in terms of the Deanan Way, I've always publicly said that I don't think the Deanan Way should be breached want to love and farm and all around there. Exmouth has got huge development with Plum Park and everything else in it now, and it's expanding hugely. But again, I stress what I said at the beginning. I've always been consistent that I do not see Exmouth joining up through Lympstone, Epford, Exton, up here, into one sort of continuous development the whole way this side of the estuary. We want to retain, and we should fight to retain, the integrity of the existing communities. That doesn't mean to say we should resist all development. That we cannot do. But certainly Lympstone, it has extraordinarily, it's fairly inaccessible, I think we'd all agree, in terms of the roads, and when you're in the middle, getting around them. So it has flooding issues as well. Some 5-6 years ago, there was a demand for more affordable housing in Lympstone. There was an organisation called the Lympettes, who wanted more affordable housing. And there has been pressure on that. But the real pressure, I think, to Lympstone has been beyond Lympstone recently, which was the threatened Cortlands development, which really would have put huge pressure on the area.
How does the government perceive the protection of our heritage assets in the light of the impending English heritage shake-up?
Well, I've been following this quite closely because I was the Shadow Culture Secretary, and I'm a friend of Simon Thurley, who I think has done an excellent job as the Chief Executive of English Heritage. I think what happened, in fact I know what happened with English Heritage, is it was beginning to perform two entirely different roles. The first role is as the custodian for many historic buildings. For instance, it looks after Apsley House in London, to name but one, and other historic properties around the country. And then the second role it has, of course, is in terms of listing and listed building, planning consent and so forth. They are two entirely distinctively different roles. So what's happening with English Heritage is being split off, and the cultural heritage side, the physical bricks and mortars, will be in one organisation, and the listed planning applications and so forth will be in another. I think that's probably the right way to proceed. What I think is there is another issue about listed planning permission, and a lot of houses in East Devon are listed in some ways, and I've been campaigning vigorously on a personal and public and personal basis with my colleague, the Chancellor, George Osborne, on this, is the VAT on repairs for listed. And there was always an understanding, if you had a listed property, that actually, in a sense, you didn't own it outright, like somebody in a non-listed property does, because the state retained an interest in your property, because the state could dictate what building materials you should use, and very often they were more expensive. And the quid pro quo for that was that you got seriously reduced VAT on any repairs, and then that was changed, and we're in this iniquitous situation now, as I would see it, and many others would see it, that you've got the VAT much reduced on new build, if at all, and on historic repairs right up there. And I think there's an argument which I shall continue to make for having either a flat level of VAT on all building and repairs, or even make it favourable again to listed buildings, but we should certainly be very aware of the built historic environment in East Devon. And again, it comes back to the neighbourhood plans as well. I would personally like to see far more of the designs of some of the new housing to fit in with our local traditional vernacular. If you look at Sidmouth, you could argue that that's white Regency, and on the whole, some of the planning developments there have tried to nod to that. Now, no one's asking for Toy Town everywhere, but I do think that good urban design, which fits in with what is there already is far more acceptable to existing communities. And I cite as an example of that the Cotswolds, where I think they've been extraordinarily clever. I don't know how many of you know the Cotswolds, where they've been extraordinarily strong about what kind of stone should be used or cladding should be used in new build. So you have a feel that you really know you're in the Cotswolds because they've actually made sure that new building nods to the existing buildings. And I'd like to see more of that here, and that's what I was hoping at the outset would happen at Cranbrook.
Should it be so easy for developers to convert buildings currently providing employment into residential housing, such as the Friends Provident buildings that we've got here in St Mary?
Well, talking of beautiful vernacular designs, I'm not sure I would include the Friends Provident building over the road here. It's a huge site, it's quite a difficult site, and it would be nice, would it not, if some big employer would come and take it on and employ lots of local people. But I think you do need a degree of flexibility in planning. Nothing is set in stone. Sometimes there will be a greater demand for office space. Other times there will be a greater demand for residential space. And so you should be flexible. But actually the way people's work, life patterns are changing now means that the lines between work and domestic life are increasingly blurred, and there's more of a demand now for home working space, which brings us neatly onto the subject of broadband, which will be of interest to everyone. Once we get everyone properly connected on broadband, I would see a lot more people working from home, and a lot of people who are at home for one reason or another and can't get out to a place of work to be able to run a business or do a job from home. So I think there should be a degree of flexibility. This is not a problem unique to East Devon. It's changing demographics, and we certainly shouldn't say these houses must remain empty because they have some kind of covenant on them which prevents them from being turned into residences, or vice versa. These are residences and can't be turned into offices, therefore they're better to remain empty. That would be crazy. We'd see some of our high streets emptying even more than they are. So I would like to see, I've always thought one of the things we've got wrong over the years is we've allowed our high streets to, frankly, there are too many high streets which look like one another. That's one reason, one problem. The other thing is I'm always amazed by what I perceive to be the huge amount of space above many shops, which is either used for storage or not used at all, which could provide wonderful starter homes for young couples or individuals, which would bring them into the heart of the village or the town, which would mean that there was genuine life there as well. And I think a combination of shops with people living above the shops in affordable space is a very good way of progressing. So that would require a mixed usage. So I think flexibility is probably the key.
Are there any more questions?
Just
Yes,
one
yes.
quick topic. In spite of what, and I put it in inverted commas, experts tell us, we're all aware of the fact that Cranbrook is going to produce an awful lot more floodwater coming down the River Clyst. We know that Clyst St Mary is very vulnerable. We saw it last winter. We were within a hair's breadth of being flooded. We know that the Environment Agency has plans in the indeterminate future to improve the flood protection at Clyst St Mary. But I submit to you that if all this development is going on, and you've already said in your own introduction that flooding is a problem, surely proper flood protection should go hand in hand with any development that takes place.
Yes, I think again some urban myths crept up about how the entire conurbation of Cranbrook was going to be built on a floodplain. But what I do think is I took Owen Paterson when he was DEFRA secretary to a meeting at Darts Farm to talk about management of that part of the river, and they did agree that this could be taken up by local people, because at the time originally the plans down for that part of the river were to have some managed retreat and to create some huge sort of wetland area, and local farmers, to my way of thinking, quite probably objected to that. So we got some movement with area, and I need to check where we've got to that, because I checked with Michael Dart. If you want to write to me, I will fill you in on that. But it did involve management of the Clis and the lower Clis, and that was rather positive news, I think. But I do agree, you only have to drive past here in the winter months to see the old bridge and the flooding, and it does need to be looked at as a whole. But I think we won the argument by getting Owen Patterson down here and discussing with the agencies that actually no longer are they going to have this sort of managed retreat and turn the whole part of the lower Clis into a floodplain for wild birds.
Yes, just to add to that, the Environment Agency have said that our defences at the moment are 1 in 20 and should be raised to 1 in 100. But the improvements in flood defence is not likely to happen until 2020, which is a long way off.
That's exactly my point. It's not going hand in hand with the development.
Well, one of the issues about the Clis, low Clis, was the way it was being managed and how they weren't allowed to do things like move loggers out of the way and things like that, which was creating flooding. That's part and parcel of what I think we got some agreement on, but I'll let you know.
We've got trees in the River Clis that are growing out of the middle of it, and fallen trees lying across it that have been there for years and years.
Exactly, it was exactly that point, amongst others, we were addressing.
Jackie?
I was just going to add that actually Clis St Mary would be better if the Darts farm land did flood, because then our fields wouldn't. So for us, I don't think it was actually that helpful.
Well, that's not an argument you want to put to the farmers further down the river. But I think I think the whole management of the Clis needs to be looked at. The problem was it was getting stuck with the environment, the whole river. And in fact, there's a local scheme when local people can actually adopt it and have responsibility for it. And I think that's the breakthrough we made with the Environment Agency.
Okay, I think there needs to be something that looks at it from Exmouth to beyond Clis St Mary. The Clis as a whole, how it joins the Ex and what might be obstructing it at Exmouth. And that's the bit that doesn't seem to be joined up, and I don't really know how we get, because I know there are lots of bodies involved, but how we actually get an overarching body to look at that.
And the thorny issue of dredging the Ex too, which is an ongoing one as well, which affects option colour.
Yes?
And just broadening that principle of infrastructure, our roads aren't keeping up with it either. So, whilst all the developments are happening, our main roads are deteriorating. There's not the pavements, there's not the crossings, there's not the support system for housing. And Devon County and highways just cannot cope with it all. And they acknowledge that effectively. And we have got to push that.
One of the problems we have, which certainly affects the budget in terms of school travel, is of course one of the largest road networks of any county in the country. I think we're just behind Yorkshire. And some of these roads are very little used and cost a fortune to keep up. And many of my constituents write to me the whole time about potholes and villages, and I go out there and stand in a pothole and then ring up the respective local councillor or the agencies, and very often things are done about them. But it is, there are huge amounts of different issues, for instance keeping the culverts clear, keeping the drainage clear. In Sidmouth there was terrible flooding when I was reviewing a parade of brownies, and the sewage burst along the front there, and talking to South West Water, that's largely to do with some of the hotels further up the hill allowing a lot of grease and fat to enter the drains, which clogs it up. So there are a tremendous amount of challenges that we need to take up. We're absolutely right, of course, is you can't just look at planning, which is always going to be contentious. Of course it is, and understandably so. You can't look at planning as just being putting houses down. It's everything that goes with it. It's where does the water go that's going to have to be run off from the forecourts of these houses? Where do the children go to school? Where are the medical services that they can access locally? Where do people work? How do they get to work? What is the bus service going to do? What are the safety factors with the lighting? What about then the light pollution? What about the zebra crossings? How does that stack up traffic elsewhere? The whole thing has to be looked at in the whole, which is why we need to get back to this idea of having a local plan and neighbourhood plans, and actually try and have some local control over what goes where and why, and critically what it looks like, and then what backs it up.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm the chairman of Livingstone Parish Council. and I thank you for coming this evening. But I've got some points I wish to make, and I've made some notes on them. Sorry, I've got a throat, but never mind, I'll do my best. The local plan. This should have been in place some long time ago, and that's left open season for these developers, which we all know. There is also the tendency with East End to avoid appeals because of the cost, which is another thing, which I would very much like you to go back to East End and to explain to them the feelings of parishes. I was at a meeting of parishes together a couple of weeks ago, and the consensus was the same with everyone, that East End does not take a lot of notice of parishes, no matter what we put forward. That's another point. The other thing which I would like to say is that the neighbourhood plan, Limstone's done one. Yes, it was. It took a lot of doing. But what I will also say, when it went before the inspector, we had 127 amendments, which watered it down to nothing, basically. So, as we saw planning and development in the village, all that can be overrode by the inspector's report, and what he has basically said must be done. So there was a lot lacking, and I think East Devon is almost a failed council, in my view. They've lost ground over the last 3 years, and I hope they'll pull themselves together and get back to where they should be. Thank you very much.
I think you're absolutely right about the local plan, and that's what I've been saying the whole way through, and have been publicly saying to East Devon that they need to get the local plan. And I'm therefore about to say quite pleased to hear from Michael that there is finally some movement, but I will let's wait till we see it finally. I think you're a little bit unfair about East Devon. Look, I'm not a district councillor, but all I would say is I think they've come under huge pressure locally by developers, because a lot of people, as I said at the beginning, obviously want to come and live in what is the most beautiful part of England, and that's put huge pressure on the district council. I think a little known figure in terms of the appeal, and you're right, appeals are extremely expensive, but I think I'm right in saying that East Devon has had an extraordinarily high level of success in its appeals. I'm looking to Mike.
We have, in the last quarter, I've had figures out today, we've had 23 appeal decisions made in the last quarter. We won 91% of them. 91% of them were dismissed. The national average is 66%. So we have an amazing record with appeals. I sit on development management as well. I've never been scared to say no. There are times when we can't say no, which I think is a misunderstanding, because if we haven't got highway support to refuse on highways grounds, which is the most frustrating, we can't refuse on highways grounds because we haven't got that support. So I think there's a bit of a disjoint between understanding what happens and what we actually do. But we have a good record. We really do. We're very strong. And here, locally, we've obviously refused 93 up the road. In Epsom and Clifton George, also in my ward, we refused in the last 6 months 100%.
So can I answer your question?
You can try.
Why have highways changed what they used to be? I've sat on Exmouth Council, East End District Council, and Limstone Parish Council over the last 30 years. And there was a time when you could not get Devon County Council to grant an exit or an entry into a property without a long stay and goodness knows what else. Now they give everything away, you can do what you like.
Well, they don't give everything away, because last committee they were opposed to at least two of the 13 applications on the agenda.
2 out of 13.
2 out of 13.
That's not
but I'm not on Devon County, so I can't speak for Devon Highways. I really can't. I'd love to.
I think if East Devon has been less than good in actually trumpeting some of these successes it's had. I mean, to have when you've got this large level of incoming planning applications, to have these statistics in terms of their successes in saying no, it's always the ones that say the threat of a big development, or the developments that get through, that get all the headlines, and also those who, for whatever reason, want to stir up and create this sort of this sort of theory that the whole place is about to have concrete poured all over it and sin. But actually, the facts need to speak for themselves in this. There is huge pressure for planning. East Devon haven't always, I don't think, done themselves justice by speaking up and pointing out where they've had some quite serious successes.
Yes, Claire.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to the gentleman at the front from Lympstone because I'm a Devon County councillor, so I'm quite familiar with highways issues. And it's a paragraph in the National Planning Policy Framework. Things have changed, and now Devon highways find it very difficult to sustain a recommendation for refusal on an application on highways grounds unless the impact is severe. And that wording is actually a paragraph of the National Planning Policy Framework. I know I keep bringing it up, but it's absolutely and totally relevant, and that's the thing that they're struggling with.
Thank you. Anyone else with questions? Yes.
There was a brief mention about broadband. Do the planners ever have any grounds to refuse applications from substantial developments because of lack of capacity of the broadband network? And perhaps secondly, is there any light on the horizon? Because at the moment, we feel like an appendage to Topsham, some 2 miles away. Thank you.
Well, on broadband, I've been promised that by October at the latest, if you listen to Connecting Devon and Somerset, which I don't believe in the slightest, speak to BT though, and they believe they've got a trunk problem on the A376 where the trunk has collapsed and they're having to renew it overnight during this summer. So I'm expecting broadband in this area to be improved by August this year. So, but I'm not, I don't have any power on that, but that's what I've been told and I believe it, so I'll keep it going.
It's a question of which comes first, broadband or the local plan.
But don't hold your breath.
But just the first part of my question, are those grounds or lack of capacity there ever used, the planners in their rejection of a scheme?
Not that I have tried on a couple of schemes in Octree actually, and no, we couldn't get a refusal on it.
Thank you.
Yes, Colin.
Take us back to roads again, if you wouldn't mind. It's been raised in lots of different contexts tonight, but two of the main problems we have with roads, in my view, is that everything comes into Clissett Mary roundabout, and then it goes from Clissett Mary roundabout onto Sandygate roundabout. I never hear very much about how problems with these roundabouts are being addressed. And really, I think they're both central and everything happens further back. I mean, to go down the Exmouth Road, you've only got to have the waste lorry picking stuff up on a Thursday or Friday, and everything stops in both directions. Can't get past. Similarly, this week or last week, whatever it was, one of the cross-country roads to the airport was closed, and the impact in the mornings on the roundabout here at Clissett Mary cleared way back probably towards Camp Hill somewhere. It doesn't take much to snarl the thing up, mainly because of the roundabouts. And if you think back 2 or 3 weeks, when there was an accident on the M5 and another accident at Pinhoe, both unfortunately fatal accidents, everything stopped at Sandygate, and all the roads basically leading into Exeter from this direction ceased to exist. Absolutely gridlocked. So unless those 2 roundabouts are addressed in some way, by alternative roads, new roads, whatever, this problem is never going to go away in this stuff, and obviously impacts a lot on the planning application.
I think it was a statement on the question.
Can you suggest a solution to it?
Well, I'm not a civil engineer. I would love to straighten out the road down to Exmouth from here, but it's I don't know quite how you would be able to do that. But I take your point about the roundabout here and Sandygate going into Exeter. But look, we've just provided a whole lot of money for a new improved access at junction 29, and so I don't know if there are any plans from the Highways Agency to improve access there. I hear what you say. It hadn't really struck me before actually that one creates a bank up on the other, but it'd be difficult to know, frankly, how to improve that off the top of my head.
Perhaps as our local MP, you could encourage the Highways Agency and Devon County Council Highways to talk to each other to work out.
Yeah, no, so
One simple solution would be to move the traffic to the services off junction 30, because that causes a lot of trouble in the summer, especially with people that can't read road signs.
Then they need another service station on the other side of the road.
Well, you know,
I'll say
sailing. Can I come back to the solar farms? Because you said, if I remember correctly, that you don't see developments of solar farms on best and most versatile land to be appropriate, which we have 2 such applications in the pipeline right now, which we're really worried that they'll get planning approval. But logically, they don't follow the national planning policy.
Well, because we do have our targets that we are the world leader in reducing carbon emissions under COP and issues like that.
But the planning applications that have already been approved for solar are way higher than what the target for 2020 is. And that's just what's been approved right now. If you take everything else that is in the pipeline, then you'll far exceed that. Solar is not actually the best environmental carbon-free electricity production method because of it being mostly available in the summer during the day when it's not used a lot domestically. It'd be much better on people's houses or on buildings rather than covering the best and most versatile fields. Scaffolding. Also, it's very cloudy here. I've left the solar data from the Met Office actually, and they talk about peak production and how many houses that could power, but peak production doesn't happen very often at all. Like last 2013 in July, the panels at the Met Office produced about half of the peak production, just because it happened to be a very cloudy month. And we have lots of those months. It's rather cloudy here actually compared to other places in the country.
Look, I have some sympathy with what you say, which is what I said earlier about I'm glad that technology is improving on solar panels to go on roofs, and particularly a lot of commercial space we can still put panels, and as if you like, the design or the aesthetics improve of them, I'd like to see a lot more going on houses as well. And as I said to you, I think that the best place for solar farms is along railway tracks and motorways and so forth. If they're being built on agricultural land, I mean, you can still technically graze in a solar farm, but it still is, you're losing that agricultural land for cultivation. That will be a planning matter, which will be decided by the district council. With regards to where my sympathies are, they are very much along the lines that you actually said.
I'll take one more question.
Can I just say, or ask, when we are thinking about, especially the big developments like to happen over FP over there, and we're thinking about the infrastructures, doctors, schools, the roads, and the comfort that the local plan is going to give us, when can we expect that joined up thinking to be with us?
Not a mind reader, and that is Mills. We've got to go to public consultation fully with it. So it's not a you know.
This year, next year?
I would hope this year. I'm doing everything I can to make sure it progresses as fast as it can now.
Right.
But you know, there is a public consultation.
Help us with that. I mean, Friends of Life aren't going to leave that building until July, August anyway. So developers won't be able to get in there and get their proper plans done. So if we had comfort that we thought the local plan would be there and be able to help us by midsummer, then that might seem more optimistic.
I think probably autumn is a safer bet, but we're doing what we can. Well, a few of us are doing what we can, let's put it that way.
Thank you. Just to wind up, thank you very much indeed for turning up this evening. I'm acutely aware of the threat that many of you feel under from planning. I think we're all agreed we want to see this local plan. I've got one or two questions you've asked me, which I shall take away and get back to you. I also will make public the results of my meeting with the Housing Minister and officials from East Devon and Exeter after I have it. And I would just end by saying that I do think we need to look at the facts, not the fiction here. What struck me were these very high levels of success in winning appeals that East Devon has had. That's not to say we're not all acutely conscious of the fact that we will be in a better place after we have an adopted local plan with neighbourhood plans, and that I think must be better with local accountability from the local community and the locally elected councillors than was the previous predict and build statistics coming out of Whitehall. It's a genuine attempt to make the whole process more democratic and accountable, combined with the recognition that we do need to build more houses.
On behalf of the community, can I thank you very much for coming along this evening.